he ruled one of medieval Africa's greatest empires. But his wealth did not appear by magic. It came from a land Europeans knew surprisingly little about. West Africa possessed some of the richest gold-producing regions known to the medieval world. Yet gold alone could not build an empire. Someone had to control the roads that carried it. Across the Sahara stretched one of the most dangerous trade networks on Earth. And at its heart was a trade so valuable that gold was exchanged for something far less glamorous: salt. Salt was essential for survival, and in parts of West Africa, it was incredibly scarce. Gold moved north, salt moved south, and wealth flowed through Mali. From this trade network, the Mali Empire began transforming into a formidable power. But before Mansa Musa, another ruler laid the foundation: Sundiata Keita. In the 13th century, Sundiata defeated his greatest rival and forged a powerful new kingdom. Victory gave Sundiata something more valuable than gold: control. Soon, Mali stretched across enormous territories in West Africa. And one of its greatest advantages was the mighty Niger River.
Along these routes, cities became centers of commerce, politics, and culture.
Then, around the early 14th century, Mansa Musa took the throne. He inherited wealth, but he also inherited a machine built to create more of it. Gold was flowing through Mali's economy, and Mansa Musa controlled a powerful share of that trade. Far beyond the Sahara, stories of this enormous African wealth were spreading. Then Mansa Musa decided to make a journey that would change how the outside world saw Mali. In 1324, he traveled toward Mecca with a vast entourage. For weeks, the caravan crossed one of the harshest environments on Earth. And according to historical accounts, the emperor carried enormous quantities of gold. Then the caravan reached Cairo, and everything changed. People had heard of Mali's wealth. Now they were seeing it. Mansa Musa spent and distributed so much gold that the local gold market was reportedly disrupted. Historical accounts say the effects lasted for years. Stories of the unbelievably wealthy African ruler traveled across North Africa and beyond. And eventually, Mansa Musa appeared on European maps. To medieval mapmakers, he became the symbol of African wealth. Yet reducing Mali to gold misses the most important part of its story. Because Mali was also home to one of Africa's most famous intellectual centers, Timbuktu. Here, scholars studied mathematics, astronomy, law, theology, and literature. In Mali, wealth was not only measured in gold. Knowledge mattered too. Grand centers of learning and worship rose from the earth. Mali's builders turned mud and timber into extraordinary architecture. Meanwhile, merchants moved goods across thousands of kilometers. Mali was connected to North Africa, the Mediterranean, and the wider Islamic world. Trade required protection, and Mali possessed a formidable military. At its height, Mali was one of the most powerful states in medieval West Africa. Mansa Musa had turned wealth into something the wider world could see. Yet even the greatest empires eventually face a question. What happens next? After powerful rulers disappeared, maintaining such a vast empire became increasingly difficult.
My bloodline has the only rightful claim. An empire demands strength, not just blood.
Faraway territories began slipping from central control. And new powers began rising across the region. But Mali's greatest legacy, the gold trade, did not simply disappear. Stories of Mali's wealth survived long after. Its political power weakened. But centuries later, many people would forget just how powerful this African civilization had been. Then historians began piecing the story back together. The lesson of Mali is not simply that Africa had gold. It was that Mali built systems capable of turning natural resources into enormous economic power. Gold, salt, agriculture, rivers, cities, armies, and trade routes all worked together. And through those networks, Mali became part of a much larger world. Mansa Musa's pilgrimage simply made that hidden world impossible to ignore. His image traveled across maps, manuscripts, and generations. For a time, Mali stood at the center of one of the world's most important gold economies. And behind the legend was something even more impressive, a sophisticated African civilization. Mali reminds us that Africa's medieval history was not a footnote. It was part of the story of the world. If you want more forgotten stories that changed the world, subscribe to History Hub and discover the history they never taught you. Imagine discovering a massive stone city in the heart of southern Africa, and then being told the people who lived there couldn't possibly have built it. But who actually actually built this extraordinary place? And why did its existence become so controversial? Long before European explorers arrived, powerful African societies had already transformed this landscape. Great Zimbabwe flourished roughly between the 11th and 15th centuries, becoming the center of a powerful regional society. The builders were ancestors of the region's Shona-speaking peoples, not mysterious foreigners from another continent. And their greatest achievement was built from something surprisingly simple: stone. They stacked granite blocks with remarkable precision, creating walls that could rise several meters high. And remarkably, the walls were built without mortar, holding the stones together. Great Zimbabwe wasn't simply a giant wall, it was a complex settlement, with homes, public spaces, and monumental architecture. At its heart stood the Great Enclosure, one of the largest ancient structures south of the Sahara. Inside were carefully designed spaces, while the hill complex dominated the surrounding landscape. Whoever controlled this place wasn't merely living here, they were displaying power. And power brought something else: wealth. The region was connected to gold-producing areas, while cattle and agriculture supported the population. But Great Zimbabwe's reach extended far beyond southern Africa. Archaeologists have found evidence of imported goods, showing that its people participated in long-distance trade. Some of those trade networks reached the Indian Ocean coast, linking this inland power to a much larger world. But centuries later, when Europeans encountered the ruins, something strange happened. Some refused to believe that local African societies had built them. Instead, theories were invented, claiming the city must have been built by outsiders. But archaeology eventually told a very different story. Evidence from the site connects Great Zimbabwe to the African societies that lived in this region. The city was not a mysterious foreign colony. It was an African center of power, production, and trade. And then, sometime around the 15th century, Great Zimbabwe's dominance began to fade. The reasons remain debated, with changing trade networks, environmental pressures, and political shifts among the possibilities historians investigate. But the stones survived. And today, they stand as evidence of a sophisticated African society that built, traded, and prospered on its own terms. Great Zimbabwe wasn't just a collection of ancient stones. It was a city and a reminder that Africa's medieval history was far more complex than many people were taught. So the next time you see these walls, don't just see ruins, see the civilization that built them. This is History Hub. Subscribe for more untold history. What if the faces of the ancient gods we know today are not the faces ancient people actually imagined. Look at the gods in museums, books, films, and popular culture. Their faces seem familiar, but ancient civilizations did not all see divinity through the same visual language we use today. And this is where the story becomes complicated, because the evidence does not give us one simple answer. It gives us clues. Begin in Kemet, ancient Egypt. Here, gods and kings were represented using a sophisticated visual system in which color could carry religious meaning. Osiris, god of the dead and regeneration, was frequently represented with a dark complexion, an image strongly connected with death, fertility, and rebirth. For Egyptians, black was not simply a description of human skin. It could evoke the fertile black earth left behind by the Nile. Even Amose Nefertari, a powerful royal woman later worshipped as a deity, was often shown with black skin. But here's the twist. That black skin does not automatically prove African ancestry in the modern racial sense. Ancient Egyptians did not organize identity using exactly the racial categories created much later. Their world was shaped by geography and relationships with neighboring peoples. So perhaps the better question isn't, was this god black? Perhaps the question is, what did blackness mean to the people who created the image? And then something remarkable appears, thousands of kilometers away. In India, Kali is not merely occasionally shown as dark. Black or dark blue skin is central to one of her most recognizable forms. But again, darkness here carries a theological meaning. Kali represents terrifying power. Destruction destroys what must end. This is where history can go wrong. Seeing a dark-skinned deity and immediately translating that image into modern racial categories may tell us more about ourselves than about the ancient tradition. And Krishna, one of India's most important divine figures, is traditionally associated with a dark complexion as well. Now the question becomes fascinating. Why have cultures separated by thousands of kilometers repeatedly connected darkness with divine power? No, not by itself. And that distinction matters. Then there is Mesopotamia, the world of Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria. Here, surviving evidence is dominated by inscriptions, reliefs, and symbolic attributes. The evidence does not give us a simple universal rule that Mesopotamian gods were originally black. And that's exactly why archaeology matters. A powerful story can begin with a fascinating possibility, but evidence determines how far we can take it. But there is another question we cannot ignore. Who gets to decide how the ancient world is represented? European colonialism did not invent every ancient image, but European scholarship developed inside societies deeply shaped by imperial power. And modern scholarship has increasingly examined how European ideas about civilization, race, and superiority influenced the way antiquity was interpreted. So there is a real history of colonial influence on knowledge, but that is different from proving that Europeans secretly changed every ancient god from black to white. That claim is dramatic, but history demands something more difficult. Show us the evidence. And then we encounter one of Europe's strangest religious traditions. Across Europe, hundreds of images known today as Black Madonnas depict Mary with dark skin. So where did they come from? Here, again, there is no single answer. Some images appear to have been intentionally made dark. Others became darker through age, smoke, pigments, or later alterations. Some writers have connected Black Madonnas to older African or pre-Christian traditions. But But historians have not established one universal African origin for every Black Madonna. What we can say is that dark-skinned sacred images became a real and enduring part of European religious culture, and their meanings changed across centuries. And some sacred images were later repainted, altered, or interpreted differently. Perhaps the most important form of erasure is not always changing a face. It can be deciding whose civilization counts as advanced, whose knowledge counts as philosophy, and whose achievements become part of world history. Africa was not an empty stage waiting for history to arrive. African societies created cities, states, technologies, religions, art, and intellectual traditions of extraordinary complexity. And we don't need to exaggerate the evidence to make that history powerful. The real power comes from discovering what the evidence actually says. Maybe the real mystery isn't whether, but why we expect the ancient world to fit modern ideas of race. Maybe it's why the modern world is so uncomfortable with the idea that ancient people imagined the divine in ways that don't fit our modern categories. History is not supposed to make the past look like us. It is supposed to show us a world that existed before us. Complicated, diverse, powerful, and sometimes impossible to fit into simple labels. And if there is something worth reclaiming, it is not a fantasy about the past. It is the right to know our history deeply enough that nobody else gets to define it for us. The faces of the gods may not tell one simple story about race. They tell us that humans have always used color, form, and symbolism to explain the mysteries of existence. So the next time you see an ancient god, don't just ask what color you see. Ask what that color meant to the people who created it. Subscribe to History Hub, because there are still stories waiting to be uncovered. What if the story of humanity began in Africa? But the world forgot to tell you the whole story? Long before Egypt's pyramids, Rome's legions, or Europe's great cities, Africa was already shaping the human story. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, our species began emerging in Africa. Homo sapiens, modern humans. They faced predators, droughts, changing climates, and enormous distances, but they adapted. Eventually, some groups began leaving Africa, beginning migrations that would spread humans across much of the planet. But early Africans were doing more than surviving. They were creating, communicating, and expressing ideas. At Blombos Cave, archaeologists found engraved ochre, dating back more than 70,000 years. These markings suggest that symbolic thought existed long before writing and the world's first cities. And then Africa's environment began changing. The Sahara was not always the desert we know today. For thousands of years, parts of the Sahara were greener, wetter, and filled with wildlife and human communities. But as the climate became drier, many communities had to move toward more reliable sources of water. One of those places was the Nile Valley. where settled communities would eventually transform human history. Farming allowed people to produce food more reliably, encouraging permanent settlements and increasingly complex societies. Villages grew, leaders emerged, trade expanded, and eventually, powerful states began taking shape. Along the Nile, ancient Egypt became one of humanity's most famous civilizations. Egyptians developed writing, allowing rulers, priests, merchants, and scribes to record information across generations. Then came monumental engineering, on a scale that still amazes the modern world. The Great Pyramid became a monument to the organization, engineering, and labor of ancient Egyptian society. But to understand Africa's ancient world, we must look beyond Egypt, toward the powerful kingdom of Kush. In what is now Sudan, Kush became a wealthy kingdom, built around agriculture, trade, resources, and the Nile. Kush traded with Egypt, fought Egypt, influenced Egypt, and eventually, Kushite rulers conquered Egypt. The Kushite rulers formed Egypt's 25th dynasty, remembered today as the era of the Black Pharaohs. Among them was Taharka, a powerful ruler. His influence stretched across Egypt and Kush. But Kush was more than a dynasty. It developed its own cities, culture, religion, art, and writing. At Meroe, hundreds of pyramids still stand as reminders of a civilization that flourished south of Egypt. Across Africa, another transformation was taking place: the growing importance of ironworking. Iron tools could strengthen agriculture, while iron weapons could transform warfare and political power. In West Africa, the Nok culture created remarkable terracotta sculptures with astonishingly detailed human features. And this is the key to understanding Africa. It was never one civilization, but many civilizations developing across a vast continent. Across deserts, rivers, forests, and grasslands, people exchanged goods, ideas, technologies, and culture. Then Rome expanded into Egypt, bringing the powerful Roman Empire closer to Kush.
But Kush was not prepared to simply surrender. Its queen, Amanirenas, led resistance against Rome.
Kushite forces attacked Roman-controlled territory, showing that Rome had encountered a serious opponent. Rome retaliated, pushing deep into Nubian territory and threatening Kush's heartland. But ancient wars were not always decided by total victory. Sometimes, survival depended on negotiation. Kush and Rome eventually reached an agreement, allowing the kingdom to survive beyond the conflict. From the first humans to powerful kingdoms, African societies repeatedly adapted to change and built new futures. Africa was not a footnote to world history. It was one of the places where world history began. And because humanity's deepest roots lead back here, African history is ultimately part of everyone's story. The lesson is simple. Civilizations rise, change, disappear, and leave behind clues for us to discover. So how much of Africa's story do we still have left to uncover? If you want to uncover the history they never taught you, subscribe to History Hub. The journey has only begun. At 8:15 in the morning, thousands of people in Hiroshima began an ordinary day, unaware that history was about to change forever. High above them, an American B-29 bomber carried a weapon unlike anything the world had ever seen. In just seconds, one bomb would unleash an explosion so powerful that humanity would enter a terrifying new age. But this weapon wasn't created overnight. Thousands of scientists had been working on a secret project. Entire secret communities were built for it. Places like Oak Ridge became centers of a massive scientific experiment. At Los Alamos, another team worked feverishly to turn atomic science into a weapon. The fear was simple. Whoever mastered atomic weapons first could possess unimaginable power. Then, on July 16, 1945, the world witnessed something terrifying. The first nuclear explosion. Scientists watching from a distance suddenly understood. They had created a force capable of destroying entire cities. 3 weeks later, another B-29 prepared for a mission
Get to that! Get those fuel lines checked now!
that would change history. Its name was the Enola Gay. Inside it was a bomb nicknamed Little Boy. Below them was Hiroshima, a major Japanese city, filled with homes, businesses, schools, and ordinary people. At approximately 8:15 a.m., Little Boy was released. A blinding flash erupted above the city. Moments later, an enormous shockwave tore through Hiroshima. The heat was so intense that silhouettes were left behind on walls and stone surfaces. In just moments, Hiroshima had been transformed beyond recognition. The United States announced that a new kind of weapon had been used against Japan.
Vector 23.
And here's where the story becomes even more complicated. Japan did not immediately surrender. Only 3 days later, another American bomber was preparing to take off. The primary target was Kokura. But the mission would take an unexpected turn. When the aircraft reached Kokura, clouds and smoke obscured the target.
You're doing what is turning to be a price.
The crew turned toward their secondary target.
Terry. Nagasaki.
This time, the weapon was called Fat Man, and it was even more powerful than Little Boy. On August 9, 1945, Fat Man exploded over Nagasaki. Once again, an entire city was devastated in seconds. But the destruction didn't end when the explosions disappeared. Then came the Black Rain, a dark, radioactive fallout that fell across parts of the devastated city. The world was beginning to understand something terrifying. Nuclear weapons could harm people long after the explosion. Japan's leaders now faced an impossible choice: continue the war or finally surrender. Then, on August 15, 1945, the Japanese people heard the announcement they had been waiting for. The war was over. World War II was ending, but another terrifying chapter was beginning. Humanity had entered the nuclear age. Soon, the United States and Soviet Union would build enormous nuclear arsenals, beginning a terrifying Cold War. Today, Hiroshima and Nagasaki are living cities, but both continue to remember the people lost in 1945. Two bombs ended one chapter of history, but they created a question humanity still faces today. If nuclear weapons changed the world once, could they change it again? Tell us what you think, and subscribe to History Hub for more untold history.
Imagine discovering a ship, drifting alone in the middle of the Atlantic. Its cargo still aboard, food still in the cabin, but every single person on board completely gone.
There were no bodies, no survivors, no clear sign of a struggle, and the ship itself was still capable of sailing. The ship was called the Mary Celeste, and what happened to the 10 people aboard remains one of the sea's most enduring mysteries. But the Mary Celeste did not begin its story as a mystery. It began as an ordinary merchant ship. The vessel was built in Nova Scotia in 1861 and was originally named the Amazon. Over the years, the ship suffered accidents and changes of ownership before eventually receiving the name that would make it famous. Mary Celeste. In 1872, command belonged to Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs, an experienced American sea captain from Massachusetts. For this voyage, Briggs was not traveling alone. His wife Sarah and their 2-year-old daughter Sophia were coming with him. 7 experienced crewmen would complete the ship's company. On November 7, 1872, the Mary Celeste left New York Harbor. Its destination was Genoa, Italy, across the Atlantic and Mediterranean. Below deck was a valuable cargo, 701 barrels of industrial alcohol. The ship also carried enough food and water to support the people aboard for months. Nothing about the voyage suggested that the Mary Celeste would become one of history's greatest maritime mysteries. But the Atlantic was not going to make the journey easy. The Mary Celeste encountered rough weather during its journey toward the Azores. For the crew, every storm meant another test of the ship and of the captain. Yet the ship continued westward toward the Azores. On November 25, the Mary Celeste's log recorded its final known position. The ship was near the Azores, within sight of Santa Maria Island. Then the written record of the voyage effectively stops. Nine days later, another vessel was sailing through the Atlantic. It was the Dei Gracia, commanded by Captain David Morehouse. On December 5, the crew noticed something strange on the horizon.
A ship was moving strangely through the water.
It was the Mary Celeste. At first, the crew of the Dei Gracia could not understand why nobody appeared to be responding.
Ahoy! Anyone there?
Captain Morehouse moved closer. A boarding party crossed onto the Mary Celeste. And what they found was almost impossible to believe. There was no captain. No crew. And no Sarah Briggs or little Sophia. Ten people had vanished. But the Mary Celeste was not a wreck. It was still afloat and capable of being sailed. Much of its cargo remained intact. And food and water supplies remained aboard. So why would an experienced captain abandon a functioning ship in the middle of the Atlantic? There was one enormous clue. The ship's only lifeboat was gone. Whatever happened, the people aboard had apparently left the Mary Celeste themselves. But abandoning a large sailing vessel for a tiny lifeboat in the open Atlantic was an extremely dangerous decision. Another clue was found below deck. One of the ship's pumps had been disassembled. There was also water in the lower part of the ship. But the amount of water was not enough to explain a sinking ship. And that contradiction became central to the mystery. Then investigators examined the alcohol cargo. Nine barrels were found empty. But there was no evidence that the crew had simply drunk the alcohol. And later investigation suggested that the 9 empty barrels were made from a more porous type of wood and may have leaked. With the crew missing, almost any explanation seemed possible. To explain the mystery, pirates were suggested.
Mutiny was suggested.
Some even imagined sea monsters and other extraordinary explanations. But British authorities in Gibraltar investigated the case carefully. The investigation lasted for months. Despite suspicions, investigators found no convincing evidence that the crew had been murdered. The case remained without a definitive explanation. Then something happened that transformed a strange maritime disappearance into a worldwide legend. Writers began adding details that were never established by the evidence. In 1884, Arthur Conan Doyle published a fictional story inspired by the mystery. His fictional account helped push the Mary Celeste mystery even deeper into popular culture. But modern researchers have proposed a much less supernatural possibility. One reconstruction suggests Captain Briggs may have feared that the ship was taking on dangerous amounts of water and that the pump problem prevented him from confidently judging the situation. The ship had also endured rough weather, and the captain was navigating near the Azores. Modern analysis suggests the Mary Celeste could have continued drifting hundreds of miles without its crew. That means the abandoned ship itself was never the impossible part. The real mystery is what happened in the moment before everyone left. Did Captain Briggs believe the ship was about to sink? Did he order everyone into the lifeboat as a temporary precaution? And if that happened, why did nobody ever make it back? This is where the evidence ends. No confirmed survivor ever returned to explain what happened. No definitive the missing boat was identified that solved the case. And no theory has been proven beyond doubt.
We know 10 people sailed aboard the Mary Celeste.
We know the ship was found without them. We know its cargo was largely intact. We know its lifeboat was missing. And we know the crew's ultimate fate was never established.
Perhaps the Mary Celeste was never haunted. Perhaps there was no monster, no pirate attack, and no impossible supernatural event. Perhaps the answer was hidden in a chain of ordinary dangers: bad weather, uncertainty, navigation problems, water, and one desperate decision.
A decision that may have saved them from a sinking ship. may have placed them in even greater danger. More than 150 years later, the Mary Celeste still sails through history. Not because we know what happened, but because we don't. And sometimes, the greatest mysteries in history are the ones that refuse to give us an answer. Subscribe to History Hub for more untold stories from history. Imagine an African emperor so wealthy that when he entered Egypt, the price of gold began to fall. His name was Mansa Musa, and he ruled one of medieval Africa's greatest empires. But his wealth did not appear by magic. It came from a land Europeans knew surprisingly little about. West Africa possessed some of the richest gold-producing regions known to the medieval world. Yet gold alone could not build an empire. Someone had to control the roads that carried it. One of the most dangerous trade networks on Earth. And at its heart was a trade so valuable that gold was exchanged for something far less glamorous: salt. Salt was essential for survival, and in parts of West Africa, it was incredibly scarce. Gold moved north, salt moved south, and wealth flowed through Mali. From this trade network, the Mali Empire began transforming into a formidable power. But before Mansa Musa, another ruler laid the foundation: Sundiata Keita. In the 13th century, Sundiata defeated his greatest rival and forged a powerful new kingdom. Victory gave Sundiata something more valuable than gold: control. Soon, Mali stretched across enormous territories in West Africa. And one of its greatest advantages was the mighty Niger River.
Along these routes, cities became centers of commerce, politics, and culture.
Then, around the early 14th century, Mansa Musa took the throne.
He inherited wealth, but he also inherited a machine built to create more of it. Gold was flowing through Mali's economy, and Mansa Musa controlled a powerful share of that trade. Far beyond the Sahara, stories of this enormous African wealth were spreading. Then Mansa Musa decided to make a journey that would change how the outside world saw Mali. In 1324, he traveled toward Mecca with a vast entourage. For weeks, the caravan crossed one of the harshest environments on Earth. And according to historical accounts, the emperor carried enormous quantities of gold. Then the caravan reached Cairo, and everything changed. People had heard of Mali's wealth. Now they were seeing it. Mansa Musa spent and distributed so much gold that the local gold market was reportedly disrupted.
Historical accounts say the effects lasted for years.
Stories of the unbelievably wealthy African ruler traveled across North Africa and beyond. And eventually, Mansa Musa appeared on European maps. To medieval mapmakers, he became the symbol of African